Hi, and welcome to another segment of the Speak Up Tampa Bay show, this one on the value of creativity. We have with us some really great guests tonight, and I hope by the end of the night we're going to know whether Tampa is a creative city or a place for creative people to come together and enjoy it or not. We're going to probably be able to answer that question, and we're going to take your calls too a little later on in the program. First, I'd like to welcome Deanne Roberts, who is the chair of the Greater Tampa Chamber of Commerce this year and is also the president of Roberts Communications. And Ben Eason, who's the publisher of Weekly Planet and also a board member of Speak Up Tampa Bay. And James Moore, an ex-board member of Speak Up Tampa Bay and a community design principal with HDR Inc. and an architect. All right, well, welcome. We were going to talk about creativity today, and I think Deanne got us going because she's doing something very shortly.
Yes. The Chamber of Commerce and a number of other business and arts organizations in the community are bringing the author of a new book called The Rise of the Creative Class to Tampa this Friday at 8 o'clock at the Performing Arts Center.
8 o'clock a.m.
In the morning, yes.
Creative people don't wake up at 8 o'clock.
Well, that's true. We've got to drag everybody out.
Okay.
The thesis of this book is very interesting, and it's why we decided from an economic development standpoint to bring him here. Architecture and design, like James, journalism, advertising, I'm in the advertising business. All these are very creative professions. These are knowledge workers. These are people who think for a living and have ideas. So if you provide a place where they want to live, companies will follow them, venture capital will follow them. And the key to finding a place where they want to live, you've got to have a great arts, great entertainment areas, highly diversified community, very, very tolerant of other people. So tolerant of every kind of people, nationality, sexual orientation, age, etc. So we've been thinking that we could do a better job in the Tampa Bay area of improving our creativity and therefore our attractiveness to this creative class. So that's why we're bringing the author.
That's fabulous. And you've read this book too, have you, Ben?
Yes,
and James?
We actually, the Weekly Planet hosted a mayor's dialogue back in the fall.
I recall.
And we had an outstanding audience. Unfortunately, Pam was not in the race at the time, but we had a great discussion with Charlie Miranda and Frank Sanchez and Don Ardell and Bob Buckhorn, and it was just great. And I guess Richard Florida talks a lot about technology, tolerance, and talent. So there we go.
The three T's.
Yeah, the 3 T's. And it was interesting. I have to say, my favorite person in the race for these cultural creatives kinds of things was Don Ardell. Right. He just really did an outstanding job.
He talked about that quite a lot, didn't he?
Yeah, and he's great. And he talks a lot about wellness, which is to some extent it's all sort of tied into the same bundle. But he's talking about quality of life and how how a city should foster that kind of quality of life and make it the kind of place that folks really want to live here. And I think Richard Florida's ideas are outstanding. I'm thrilled, Deanne, that you guys, the Chamber, have brought him in. The best I could do is sort of muster up a mayor's dialogue to talk about it. So, and I'm thrilled that Pam's reasonably open to these ideas.
Pam is reading this book. As she told me last week, she was in the middle of it. So she has turned on to this.
At the time.
I don't know. She was reading it during the campaign, though.
James, what about you with regard to this? You've read the book too. You got some thoughts?
I've seen Richard speak twice.
Okay.
He is a phenomenal speaker. Okay, I mean, he's engaging. He's active. He's really on point. I think people will he's a charming speaker, and I think he has a way of really touching the hot buttons for the audience. Clearly, the book is very fresh. He'll tell you that the research is really in the last 4 or 5 years. Probably unproven except for the examples of the cities that he shows, places like Austin and Madison and San Francisco, and places that we think about. Needless to say, as a resident of Tampa, the first time I heard him, I immediately started thinking, okay, how does that relate to where we are? Mm-hmm. it's a tough challenge, I think, to say that we're suddenly, as a culture, going to become more creative. But I think there are opportunities. And one of the things, if you read the book and you sort of look at what he's saying, in many ways he references his childhood in Newark a lot, back in the 50s and early 60s, when it was really a very diverse, mixed use. It was deteriorating as a city, but still quite vibrant. And much of what he talks about are these sort of vibrant areas where they draw young people, but they also draw older people. They just draw people who are active. Certainly one of the goals in my business is this notion of the 24-hour city or the 24-hour neighborhood, places where you can go at 11 o'clock and find a good meal, or places where you know there will be things happening.
The hardest adjustment for us New Yorkers to make when we moved to Florida. What do you mean? It's 3 o'clock? I can't go bowling?
Precisely.
3 in the morning?
Precisely.
I could go bowling if I were in Manhattan.
And that's a tough one, but I think that's actually changing. But Lewis Mumford once said that the real purpose of a city is to create a friction. Is to create friction between all these people bumping into each other, because that throws off ideas. And to some extent, he said this in the 1930s, really looking historically. To some extent, that's what Richard's talking about as well, is creating those kinds of places that are very open to the wide variety of people, and really making them just part of the culture of this community. The second thing that I think he stresses is that these cities are very experiential. They're about participating. It's not about watching other people, unless you want to sit and watch people walk by, which is kind of interesting, sort of, on the street. But it's about, he says the creative people are very participatory, whether it be, running marathons or getting involved at a community level, like a, big brother, big sister type of thing. And that you really have to look for people to participate. It's not a vicarious culture, it's a participatory culture.
He defines creative interest. I just scanned the website, did not read the book, so I'm like the audience probably, which is a good thing. I just would have assumed creative people to be creative people that I know, artists, writers, performance art, so forth, theater and these kind of things, but he doesn't do that.
No, because really you're talking about people who are creative in their work, and it doesn't have to be entertainment or art. So for example, I have a son who's at Georgia Tech, and he's a computer science major. All right, so this is a basic nerd. He's very creative. He's he's the type that will write software when he comes out, and these creative workers in technology are very, very attractive to a community. Here's what they do for us. They move our per capita income up. So, for example, Austin, which has attracted so many technology workers, their per capita income has gone way, way up. If we were a place where we could attract more technology workers, I think we'd all benefit from that. It'd be a rising tide.
Plus, as you're saying, we could bring our kids back here.
Exactly. I want my kid to have a place to work in Tampa when he gets out of Georgia Tech. I mean, he'll probably end up in Atlanta or Seattle if we don't develop more of a tech market here.
But they included also lawyers and accountants.
Anybody who services the creative class. So all of the professionals who work for the creative class are considered part of the creative class.
Though I went and looked at how he rated us, and I see us as 26th out of 49, which is pretty good. We're even on the map, don't you think? Because I think you just said that the Brookings Institute rated us in a different way. What was that?
Well, one of their categories. The one category that they had us 27th out of 50, so it's essentially the same. It's an article that he wrote for the Brookings.
Oh, okay.
And he used a series of indices. The one area that we fell down very badly is in the number of college graduates in our community.
Oh, he got more specific in the book, or in that, than he did in this.
Right.
This was just rankings on high tech, innovation, and diversity. And combining those scores, we ranked as 26th, which put us below Kansas City and a whole host at Rochester, New York. Go figure. I just wonder about that. How did you receive these, or?
Well, I thought we did pretty well. We did not rank very high on the technology scale. We did rank pretty high on the diversity scale, which means we're a pretty diverse community and we're fairly tolerant of diversity. What was the one that you referenced?
It was something he had written for the Brookings Institute. He had us 18th as far as what he calls the gay index, the foreign-born index, and 23rd for composite diversity.
And then the 4-year degrees were a little low. Well, see, now that makes sense, because if you think about, from an economic development standpoint, who we've recruited to this market over the past 10 years or so, we've recruited a lot of big companies out of New York, and they're looking for AA degrees. A lot of them were looking for a little lower level. And we had a very high preponderance of AA degrees in this region. It's slowly moving up, and we need to get it up.
Well, I would also suspect that, you know, we have a lot of an older population, many of whom didn't go to college.
Yeah.
And so that's counting against our cohort, even though the active worker population is probably.
But our age is coming down, isn't it? Isn't it
Yeah.
down? It used to be
Right, it's lower than it's
50,
been.
like
And our
under
income's
50
going
now,
up.
45.
Yeah, I think. I mean, I actually think that Tampa is roughly, I don't know, somewhere between 18 and 21st market. If you just take the Tampa Bay market, the TV market is like 14th or 13th or something, because they sweep in Sarasota. So
That's size.
Yeah, size of market. So I mean, in terms of just you know, we're somewhere 18, 19, 20, somewhere in that range, just as a market. So you know, on most of these market numbers, you're gonna it's basically Tampa's about the sort of middle of the pack. It's about where it ought to be. A little bit worse in some things like education, a little bit better in some others like diversity. So it just kind of all tends to wash out there. I actually am kind of I think that if we draw on our own sort of experiences and what. And I guess you're native here, is that right?
Right.
So we're probably representative. We got 3/4 non-native here. Louise from New York. You're from Long Island. I'm from Georgia.
Long Island,
And,
like it's a separate place.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Apart from the city.
Exit what? Exit what?
But I mean, if you think about what brought us here, what kept you here, you'd have to just pull me out of here with a crowbar. I mean, I can't imagine living anywhere else because the lifestyle is phenomenal. The diversity's great. Interesting folks. I mean, you can meet interesting people in Tampa where you wouldn't meet them in Chicago or in New York. I mean, the whole class system kind of kicks in. So, I mean, I think to some extent, and I know a lot of folks, I know a lot of venture capital folks, and I know a lot of people that have extraordinary business careers who just chose to live here. And I think that to some extent, when Richard Florida is talking about technology or anything, they're looking for folks that can incubate businesses or that can pull things together. And the thing that's frustrating to me, and this is goes back to the political leadership, or what I'm hoping that Pam's going to pick up on, and I would pray that the county commission would ever pick up on this, but some can, some can't. Is how do you take all these talented folks and bring them together? It's like there's almost no friction here because everybody retreats to their walls.
And that's the perfect question for James.
Right. Well,
how do you do that from an architectural standpoint at the very least, and we'll talk about a business.
Well, I mean, if you think of something like the city of Tampa, obviously we can annex additional lands in the sort of
But
the
we're
northeast.
doing this like wiggly thing
Right,
now.
but the reality is that the bulk of the city is in a redevelopment mode. I mean, you have to create those places. When I first lived here, we lived at the end of Howard Avenue. This is back 1990, 1991. It was completely different then than it is now. And you're beginning to see this sort of place growing. It's where they have the coffee shops. It's where you can go,
Right.
things are happening. And a great city needs dozens and dozens of those places like that, where you can say, let's just drive down and see what's happening. A lot of times they are associated with universities. To be absolutely honest, our sort of relationship with USF is still kind of tenuous. I mean, it's a very big sort of entity there at the northern part of the city. There's nothing really going on around it. It has not generated the sort of cultural milieu that you see in places like an Austin or a Madison, or even in West Philadelphia around the University of Pennsylvania, where I went. It's great to have the students, but you need to have a place for them to actually incubate.
Like a Rice Village, for example,
Precisely,
in Houston, which
precisely,
is
a University
just
Heights, a
wonderful.
University Village, whatever you want to call it. Even something like, say, the West Shore Business District, 70,000 plus workers, but you can't walk anywhere. And so people drive to the mall or they drive to the restaurant, and that's fine, you still get to see them, but it's like the minimal friction. And where you want to create is very sort of optimal friction.
We're isolating people the way we got
Exactly.
structured right now.
Exactly.
So
And-
from that standpoint, what would we do with these places? Would we just go create new ones or try to do with what we have now and
I think the opportunities are in finding some of these older places, the Seminole Heights, Tampa Heights,
my home?
West Tampa. I mean, there are opportunities. You may only see 2 blocks, but there are places where, and it doesn't necessarily have to all be by gentrification. I mean, that's a powerful weapon, and people often say, well, it's kind of, it's sort of snob appeal type of thing. But basically, what you need is an influx of capital. and it has to come from somewhere. One of the interesting things that he touches on, but it's very, very true, people are getting married much later than they used to. Professionals are often established before they get married, certainly before they have children. So they have access to money that they can direct towards things. I mean, he mentions it in his issue of the Gay Index, that these are people who often can put money back into their communities, whether it be fixing a house or getting involved in something that, say, a family with 2 children would just be focusing on the children. So there are opportunities, and it's really a case of finding places. All those artists who I met in the late 80s, early 90s who were in Ybor and are now dispersed.
There's a lot of them in Seminole Heights.
Seminole Heights, some of them are in St.
They've put things up
Petersburg.
on Nebraska, little shops and so forth.
It's creating these little enclaves where people can come together.
Yeah.
Because that's what people are really,
When you
are really
say
looking
put
for.
money into it or finance, how would you exactly start? Let's suppose you were talking about Seminole Heights.
It's as simple as someone buys a house, fixes it up by himself or herself, or they literally invest time and money of their own. $10,000, $15,000 to take a house that might be run down and to make it nicer. You get 30 or 40 people doing that, and you'll see spontaneous redevelopment in a neighborhood. It could be as simple as, for example, dealing with a traffic issue that makes people a little nervous about a neighborhood.
Right.
Providing something like on-street parking or streetscaping so that people say the city's committed and we want to get involved as well.
Viva La Frida,
impressed with
open
that.
it up.
Yeah, Viva La Frida, or that section of Hillsborough Avenue.
Right.
There's a section there now that is very welcoming.
Right.
And
Yeah, but I think the great example right now is Channelside, because you're
Sure.
starting to see lofts
Right.
go in there. You're seeing a lot of the artists went to Channelside.
Right.
These are warehouses that are being fixed up. And what Richard Florida says is that creative people like authenticity. They
Right.
don't want to go
That's exactly
to
right.
some suburb. They don't want to go to Celebration. They don't
Right.
want a Disney-esque
Too
thing.
artificial.
It's too artificial.
Right.
So they love older areas that are being redeveloped with those old buildings that have the great old architecture and
And one of the
streetscapes.
ironies, he talks a lot about Newark and Pittsburgh because that's where he's lived.
right.
They've got a lot of old stuff. Tampa
That's
doesn't
true.
really have a lot of old stuff. I mean, it's a little harder because until the 50s it was 100,000 people. So,
The thing when I was looking at the Richard Florida stuff, and I was thinking about it, I mean, the Ybor City is just an incredible example of, had we had this conversation, 8 years ago, and Greco read the book, and Greco's not a big reader, so you just, that's one part of it. But you look at Ybor and what Ybor had. I mean, it really, pre-mall. I mean, pre-Centro Ybor, and it's kind of interesting how and I think that ultimately Ybor will right itself again, and it'll come back around. It needs one more renaissance, I think, to go forward. But in the city's haste to help Ybor, it drove off all of these artists and stuff, and it to some extent made St. Pete. And you're just like, and it was just, I was sitting there reading this thing, and I'm going, well, this is an example of how not to do, this creative class, or how not to run a city. You're trying to get all these little feelers out with you want all the weirdos, you want everybody, and you want to love weirdos, not put a camera down in Ybor and put them under a microscope, and then bring a brand new mall in there and make it safe for somebody. I mean, it's just.
It was too cost prohibitive for a
very-
lot of the artists.
Very, very costly, but I think another example where the city, I think, did an excellent job is when they took the little Main Street on Davis Islands. They narrowed it down, they put in some streetscaping, and
Yep.
they left it alone.
Yeah.
That was it. A few
And Soho.
$100,000.
Mhm.
Soho.
Same thing with Soho. And they're much lower intensity. People kind of find it as they go along, and it slowly develops its own sort of culture. I think the issue with Ybor is that the spotlight was so intensive on it, and with so many constituents. And the other thing about Ybor City, I sit on the board of the Development Corporation. It's a pretty big area. I mean, it's like 10 blocks of 7th Avenue, and that's a massive amount. If it were 3 blocks, you could say, well, let's do this one thing. And it's such a large area. And I agree with you. I think it'll find its own level, and certain things will fall out, and certain things will strengthen. And I think over time it'll be fine. But I think there's lots of opportunities that are at a much smaller scale. And one of the neat things is I have a friend in Dallas, man named Paris Rutherford. He talks about urban acupuncture, which is sort of finding the key spots
That's her name.
that you
That's
can make
clever.
something happen. A small investment, maybe it's this intersection, or helping this store owner really grow and become a little bit more stable. We're putting in a few, infill sites for redevelopment. It's really hitting the pressure points that you get the most impact with the least amount of public side investment, particularly of money. And it's an interesting terminology, but it really is a lot of times what you try to do is to find that little tiny things that can help spawn so really spontaneous private side investment.
Well, do you think that Ybor was a case of gentrification? I mean, it looks like a lot of the artists couldn't afford to stay there, and the bars were. A lot of them had to move out because they could no longer afford those rents.
The antique shops, a lot of those.
Well, I mean, actually, James is probably a little bit better expert than I am, but I don't think it was so much gentrification as much as sort of an absence of rules. It's sort of a. I mean, to some extent, when you're talking about Davis Island, it's the city saying, here are the boundaries at which we're going to allow, private enterprise to sort of make things happen. I think the issue in Ybor was just, preponderate. The vision for that was very much a Bourbon Street and, or a lack of vision, turned it into a Bourbon Street or something. And then there was this sort of, tourist spin on top of it, which, both of which were sort of counter to the essence of an artist and a community or a little art, and it was a whole bunch of different things. So that's why I just don't think it's so much gentrification, because I think that, you sit there thinking the only new things that have gone into Ybor really in the last 50 years have been Frankie's Patio, which is now out of business, and Centro Ybor. I don't think there's anything else that is been built new. There's a few things sort of
clubs
the Camden Apartments have been built new.
I'm sorry, on 7th Avenue. I'm thinking
about
on 7th Avenue, which is.
I mean, putting a hotel in there was a major change.
Well, and I also think that part of it was simply the tenor of the times. It was 92, 93, it started to catch on, and at that point you could begin to finance things, and it really became sort of a regional draw for quite a while. Right. And when people are knocking on your door saying, I want to spend $300, $400, $600, $1 million to do something, you kind of want to go with that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's at certainly a citywide, if not a regional scale.
You just needed to make some more rules around taking that money, because we've often been Tampa, at least in the 25 years I've been here. So we've taken people's money or gotten excited about them, and they really have either fizzled or their projects haven't worked out to be beneficial to us. But we're so excited about paying that attention.
Well, also, I mean, a $30 or $40 million investment might take 8 or 10 years to really kick back at you, whereas sometimes a $80,000 investment in the right location might start to pay off very, very quickly. I mean, one of the things that it's clear that there's this lure of saying, let's try to get the tourists to come here. And I always think of it as a fairly deceptive lure, because the reality is if you can create a community that the people who are there simply think is a great place,
everybody will
show up.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so chasing them,
will come.
That's a Las Vegas or that's an Orlando, and I certainly don't think Tampa wants either of those. I mean, I think the issue is really, is to create, and Richard talks about it in his book, a people climate, a place where the people who are there feel that they belong, and that's the important thing. And the tourism will take care of itself.
Well, we need that to get across to every merchant in town too.
Well,
every convenience store, every department store. There's so many places that I think the majority of us don't feel welcome. There's the service is not there. You can have. I just see it spread all the way through as a marketing person, a PR person, who can stand there's 9 people on a line at the grocery store or at the department store, and they don't think of opening another one. It's why would you want me to wait? Why would you want my temper to get up? Why wouldn't you open that the minute you saw 2 or 3 people waiting?
I'm not going to mess with your temper.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm curious.
But it's fast. It's Italian and it's fast.
I wanted to go back to the comment that you were talking about, in terms of these urban villages, the Rice Village in Houston, that kind of thing, and go to Richard Florida's ideas about downtown, and you think about a downtown and your concept of friction, urban friction, and I'm like, our downtown can't support a McDonald's, and it's. And then I think about, I guess Carlton Fields moved out of, at least they were in Harbor Island, so you could kind of call that quasi-downtown. And when a major law firm moves to West Shore, I mean, you think about the creative class. It's that you run into people on downtown street. There's all this interaction. I can't tell you how many business deals are conducted by people bumping into one another. I mean, that's just a part of it. But now you go, and I mean, I guess you're out in West Shore, and you were telling me about having to drive.
Right. I had my office out there for 10 years. He's right.
No, literally, you will drive to a place you can see because you're crossing 7, 8, 9 lanes of fast-moving traffic.
Right.
And you're just not going to take that risk.
Well, I think the Downtown Partnership, the Tampa Downtown Partnership, is one of the sponsors of this seminar on Friday because they recognize the value of his ideas to developing a downtown. And I want to come back to something James said because it's really important, and I think that's what will make downtown go. You have to have experiential things. So, for example, he talks about a lot of arts offerings, but he's not just talking about having a world-class art or a performing arts center like we do. We have a world-class one. But, there's a show here, there's a show there, there's an opera, etc. You should be able to walk out on the street any night and see entertainment, sit down, grab an instrument, play in yourself, and you can do that in towns like Seattle and Austin. They're very art and musically inclined. Memphis, highly creative town.
Atlanta's Centennial Park. I was there this weekend and luckily had a view of Centennial Park from the Omni, from the CNN Center. And yesterday took a walk around there. And on Sundays they play music and the fountains are choreographed according to the what. Well, but I want you to know that there were plenty of security and police in their short pants and little bicycles around, but children were running in and out of the water. There were all sorts of people and diverse, very diverse group of people there, and we just sat there for an hour and just listened to this music and watched the choreograph and all the people around and so forth. And I kept thinking, that's what we should have done with Franklin Street. And that was experiential because the people could have gone right on there if they wanted to.
Exactly. It's not walking into a hall and buying a ticket and sitting down and waiting for the curtain to rise. It's being able to just go out into a park and see things.
And what amazed me is all the park benches didn't have dividers in them so somebody couldn't fall asleep in them if they needed to. Which I've always been sort of angry about. Why do you do that? Well, because homeless people said, well, if they need to sleep there, why don't you just throw a mattress under it? But, we're not friendly about any of that. And they certainly do have their hands full of panhandlers around that are constantly bugging you. But they're very polite.
Well, one of the things about panhandlers is they tend to go to places that no one claims. And no one really claims downtown Tampa. I mean, if you're there during the day, there's a lot of people, you can do things, but then it sort of clears out. And clearly the opportunity to put some urban housing in. I mean, in many ways, the definition of urban that I use is, can I survive, can I live there without recourse to an automobile? Okay?
Right, that's true.
And we kind of fail that test.
Yeah.
And realistically, any great city needs neighborhoods and districts where you can do that. We talk about light rail, but if light rail isn't attached to creating these kinds of districts, then what's the impetus to use it? I mean,
light rail needs to be later.
But you need to create the beginning of an area where you can function. And if it turns out it's downtown and Harbor Island and one or two other, that's fine, that's a start. And then people will make the choice. I can live in a tower 4 miles down Bay Shore, or I can live in a tower right downtown, a block from the Performing Arts Center, a block from the river. I have that choice. I mean, that's really the issue, is creating increasing diversity of choices about where to live, how we want to live. I mean, the fact that they're building lofts in the Channel District is kind of neat. Typically, lofts are the things you find and you convert. But clearly there's a demand, and since we don't have them historically, they're building them.
They're converting some, they're building some others.
Right.
They're doing that on Howard too, aren't they? Didn't they build some lofts on Howard as well?
I mean, and so what you're beginning to see is the beginning of some different districts that cater to the diversity of the people who live here. I mean, an interesting statistic, and I don't know if he mentions it, but in 1960, 49.8% of the households in the United States were mom, dad with kids under the age of 18. Right now it's 23.5%. The single largest demographic is single adults living alone. 26% of the households in America are single adults living alone. And then the next one, at just under 25%, is 2 adults living together with no children. So 50% of the population is adults with all the spending power.
And child-free.
And without the children, either because they've never had them or because they're empty nesters or they're planning to have them but it's in the future. That's a very different city than one that is predominantly about mom, dad, and the nuclear family. That's a suburb. I mean, that's why suburbia came into being. Well, it's transitioning. And the opportunities are really to reclaim some of the urban things that we had historically, but to do it in a way that's much more flexible, I think much more, just better done.
Yeah, the more the going outside into the suburbs has created a hassle for a lot of folks. That they realize as well that, it takes time and away from your regular life. Well, how does the Chamber see what they can do with all of this? I know the Chamber and the partnership are involved in it. What are they thinking can be done? You're talking from a design standpoint, but from a business standpoint or a Chamber standpoint.
Well, I think a number of things can be done. First of all, there's just simply the recognition that one of the main things that attracts businesses today is quality of life. You don't have to throw a lot of incentives at these companies anymore. You don't have to give them, real low taxes and real low pay. That you give them a great lifestyle and you can attract some great companies. So we're focused on a lot of lifestyle issues, very focused on quality of life. So you'll find at the Chamber we've got an arts and cultural committee, we've got a sports committee, we have a military committee so we can make military feel really comfortable here. We have all these different committees that focus on quality of life issues. And if we do that well, then these companies will come, these creative workers will come, the venture capital will come. So we're overlaying this strategy on what we already do. Tampa has been very successful over the last 10 years in bringing in a much more diversified economy. It's one of the reasons why we've survived this recession so well. We had a net gain in jobs last year. 2002, we had a net gain in jobs. Places like Chicago were losing 60,000 jobs. Of course, New York lost an awful lot. 9/11 contributed to that. Atlanta's had a tremendous job loss. Tampa had a net gain of about almost 6,000 jobs. The reason for that is we're no longer dependent on agriculture, tourism, and real estate development. And that's what we traditionally were dependent on in our economy here. So I've been in business, I've had my company 25 years. So I've lived through some business cycles, and I'll tell you, we were so dependent on real estate development in the 80s that when the bottom fell out, I almost fell out. Same thing happens in Orlando with tourism. You get too dependent on it, and you can't withstand the swings in the economy. We've stabilized that now. We've gotten a lot of companies here that are much more stable. Yes, they come and they go a little bit. The call centers, one will go out of business and another one will move in. But we've stabilized and diversified the economy. We've got a financial services sector. Now we need to overlay a strategy of trying to ratchet up the job quality and make places where your kids and mine can come back because they're these highly creative, well-paid people, and we've got to create those kinds of jobs. Right now we have 29% of the population in Tampa Bay can be considered part of the creative class. We need to move that ratio up a little bit. But I'd like to see us do it without the gentrification that's occurred in places like Austin. And because we're a little behind this curve, I look at it, I'm seeing a silver lining here. Of course, I'm a Chamber of Commerce person. I can't help but being optimistic. But, my sense is that we look at what happened in some of these other markets like Austin, and we fix some of the mistakes. They were not diversified. They lost a ton of jobs in this recession because they were so technology dependent. The other thing is, if you're a nurse or a school teacher, you can hardly afford to live in Austin anymore. I mean, they left behind their middle income workers because some of these folks are making such huge salaries.
But that's Boston, that's San Francisco, that's Seattle.
So what do we do?
San
Diego, what do we do to
right?
maintain some affordable housing and affordable areas so as we ratchet up to get higher paid jobs, we don't leave behind a lot of people?
Well, in certain areas, for example, South Tampa. South Tampa is a peninsula. There is X amount of developable land there, and it's now recycling, often through the second or third. It's going to be at a higher value simply because it's so little of it. but there are other neighborhoods, the Seminole Heights, the Tampa Heights.
The river.
I mean, if you think about West Tampa, it is 2.5 miles from the airport. It is 2.5 miles from City Hall, along an interstate highway.
Yeah, it's great.
Talk about locational values. It has the
That's
river
the same
there
thing.
as well.
I'm amazed since I moved into Seminole Heights, because from my door to the Performing Arts door is 5 miles and 5 minutes. It actually takes me less time than when I lived on Davis Island.
That's right.
Now, why is that? You know, you think, well, because there's a lot of traffic going that other way. I'm right on the highway, and there's no lights, no way. Just shoot right down there.
And, I mean,
5 minutes.
One of the things is, I think, is really to start to analyze where the opportunities are, and then it gets back to this issue of sort of the urban acupuncture. What's keeping West Tampa down a little bit, or what's keeping Seminole Heights not quite from hitting its potential? Right. And it may be simple things, it may be structural things, it may be one of the things we discover when we work with a lot of communities, St. Petersburg being one. In St. Petersburg, something like 60% of the residential lots in the city are illegal, because in the 50s they rezoned themselves and they made all the traditional lots non-conforming. So if you try to do something in a situation like that, it's going to be nightmarish. And they are now revisiting their development codes and saying, this is silly. If 50 feet was the standard in 1926, why make it 70 now? The neighborhood still works. It may not be huge money issues that are impacting it. It may
rules,
be
just rules,
regulations. It could be just bringing attention to it, you know, sort of marketing things in a slightly better way.
Or these roadways too, because you can get into some of the areas, and I can speak to Seminole Heights. Nebraska's not pretty.
Right.
It's just not pretty, but you get in to the big oak trees. South Tampa people want oaks.
Central Avenue.
Come on, you know, out there we all have 10 or 11 on our properties, and you can get in there and just gorgeous stuff, but some of the entryways are not as pretty as they need to be.
I wanted to sort of offer up an, you know, I mean, I think that all of the, I think the urban planning and those kind of elements are real key. I just think that there's a few things that Tampa needs to do and should do that don't cost any money, but it, you know, requires, you know, Tampa sort of looking at itself in a different light. I think that, you know, just the boards and things that I've been around. I was on the Chamber of Commerce board a few years ago, and I think everybody, you know, kind of goes in there, they put these rose-colored glasses on, and they kind of, gee whiz, Wally, you know, we've got this great place, everything's great, you know, if we just all say it's great, it'll be great. And, you know, I think we've got some real issues. I mean, I know when Betty Kasser was the president of the University of South Florida, she tried to get the, you know, the community USF initiative, and that was a good concept. I mean, it, you know, kind of got some things going, but it didn't sort of finish the run, and now USF is sort of back in its, you know, old kind of ways, albeit they've got some great technology programs and some good, you know, research going on, but USF has gone back into its island, and, you know, notwithstanding, you know, we got a full Republican board of USF that's, you know, it's all Republicans, no Democrats, so they've got their spoils, and, you know, that does some bit to disconnect community. You know, I know that Miami just went through, David Caton was down in Miami running through the, you know, whipping up the whole anti-gay vote on housing. You know, he was successful at repealing the gay housing what they call preference, I guess, in the county. So, you know, Hillsborough County is yet to go back. Hillsborough County is yet to go back and update that. And it's like, okay, the city can afford to not let people discriminate against gays, but the county can't. You know, and you go, where does the tolerance fit in there? And you know, and I think, you know, you get into this diversity stuff. And the one thing I loved about Greco was, you know, Greco, you know, grew up on the wrong side of the tracks, you know, and so, you know, you got a guy like that in there, and I think to some extent, you know, Charlie Miranda and a lot of the politicians that can speak of Ybor, some great stuff to build about, but we forgot all this stuff, you know, in our History Center. Pat Reardon, before he passed away, I was talking to him about the History Center, and he goes, God, we used to have anarchists and communists and socialists and, you know, and all this stuff in Ybor City. And I'm going, man, now that's, you know, that sounds like a cultural, creative kind of place. Yeah. You know, a lot of people arguing about ideas, sort of half of them crazy, but that's okay. But they're arguing about ideas. But I think to some extent we don't want to go there, you know. And it's just, I think if people could, like, be willing to, you know, engage with one another and not, like, you know, worry about, you know, this or that. And that's what I'd like to see a gaminess that, you know, that leadership in Tampa doesn't sort of run for cover on. I mean, public access, not to weave that, you know, totally into it. It's just
Why not?
good God, what the hell is Charlie Perkins going to do to anybody in this town, you know? And everybody thinks that, you know, he's gone out with a machine gun and mowed down a bus full of kids or something.
Not only that, wouldn't it have been interesting if our community had embraced us creative types that decided to take over the channel to try to change it and improve it and help it and make it more of a community resource instead of criticize it. That's the thing. We were asked to come up here and take this channel over. We turned it down 3 or 4 times, said we don't want anything to do with that. And then we were convinced that it needed somebody to help it along, and that we could bring communities together and bring information out about events like yours, or, you know, the one that you're talking about. And we've been knocked down from the day we started. I mean, we just haven't even almost had a chance to get the people on board that we need to get on board to make this a place you can discuss, and then have a telephone and have people give you ideas and thoughts that they have going.
I was going to say, not to go back to, but Greco ducked the gay ordinance. You know, it was going on in the county, and he said, "Oh, that's not a city issue. I can't talk about that." You know, I'm going, what would have got for him to just stand up and say, "I think it's wrong." You know, I just think it's wrong. I mean, you know, the county, the folks in the county,
because he's generally open-minded as well.
Well,
anyway.
I mean, he's been the victim of discrimination, you know, all his life. And you're going, well, you know, what do you say? I think it's right. I think it's wrong. And I think to some extent, that's why I just really go back to the Richard Florida thing, is that I just think it's exceptional that, you know, if we're talking about tolerance and talent and technology, let's do it. You know, I mean, let's not talk about it, and you know, let's just sort of lock arms and do it. And I think that's what.
Well, I think with your running, this is a new tack for the chamber, isn't it?
This is not your father's chamber.
This is not the chamber that I was on the board of governors of. I can tell you that back when you and I started up there together. But
well, you've got the traditional business community saying this makes some sense. Let's listen to these ideas, and I think that's where you're going to get some systemic change. We're co-sponsoring this, by the way. Let me give all the groups, because it's really amazing to think that we're all on the same page. So it's the Greater Tampa Chamber of Commerce, the Tampa Bay Partnership, so that's a regional business organization, Tampa Bay Technology Forum. These are the folks who used to hate the chamber because they were high-tech and they thought they were excluded. You got the Hillsborough County Arts Council, Pinellas County Arts Council, the Florida High-Tech Corridor, and the Tampa Downtown Partnership, and the Performing Arts Center. Look at that integration.
Now look at what else you got. You got the Speak Up Tampa Bay Public Access Channel.
That's right.
That's definitely willing to go on record as being one of your sponsors, because here it is.
Yeah, well, I think you're right. If you've got to walk the walk too. And I was asked by a journalist about the gay index, and I said, it's a sentinel. If a community is tolerant of gays, they're going to be tolerant of most anybody. And so why not use that as your indices of how tolerant you are? Mm-hmm. And it just makes a lot of sense.
But, you know, even getting back to, we do all right.
We do all right.
I mean, it's always, you like,
we
like
do
to do
and we don't.
Better.
I went to the website that Richard Florida has, creativeclass.org, which you sent me, and it had a test for how creative is your company, and then another test for how creative is your city. Right. And the first question was, do you have gay leadership, business and political leadership? The answer, yes, but nobody knows. Yes, but we don't talk about it. Yes, but we might as well be in the military.
Don't ask, don't tell.
I thought, well, I can't answer these. It doesn't have one of those yes buts. Yeah, sure, we do, but who knows who they are? I mean, we have them in the crew of Gasparilla too, but who knows who they are too? So, you know, it's interesting because they're hidden. Isn't that a difference?
But I think that part of what it's going to take, you have the talent, the technology, and what was the
tolerance.
Mm-hmm. The fourth one is time. And I think over time, I mean, I've been here now 15 years. Mm-hmm. This community has changed enormously in 15 years. And I think, again, when I came here, I was staggered by the potential, you know, coming out from the Northeast, and how fluid things can be here, how easy it is to actually get to meet people and to know people, and how malleable it is. I mean, it truly is a city that we can help define and create, whether it be just an individual volunteering for something versus people in professions who actually sit on boards and work and really try to help provide some leadership. It's a project that is still sort of underway. And that's part of the charm of it.
You can make a difference here.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you really
can. In some of these big cities, and you could never make a difference. You can make a difference.
And I know
here.
that sounds kind of trite, and people say, well, but it's the truth.
It
I mean,
is.
the opportunity, the accessibility
That's
of Mayor Greco. I mean,
Right.
just a guy you bump into, you chat. You
Who,
talk.
by the way, supported public access television.
And, you know, just the accessibility of many of our leaders is phenomenal, considering, you know, say a Boston or a Philadelphia or a Chicago. And that's something, but it's something, again, that we need to actively build on.
Well, and I think you've got a leadership transition going on, particularly in Tampa. It's happening throughout the Bay Area, but particularly in Tampa, which is the old southern town. And a lot of our former leaders who've done wonderful things are retiring. A lot of them are old and dying. And so you've got this gap, and there's a lot of people who can step up. And as we have seen, a lot of the women in this community have stepped up. You've got a woman mayor, you got a woman chair of the city council, both
Three
the council
city
and
commissioners, county commissioners,
majority
county
of the
attorney.
school board. I mean, here I am, chair of the lead economic development organization in Hillsborough County. I mean,
You know,
women have arrived.
what
in
you're
this.
both saying reminds me of you suggested I go to that a couple of years ago to the National Civic League conference, and the mayor of D.C. was there, who had what's his. Do you remember his name?
I know you're talking
Well,
about. He's the one
when
that
he-
failed his write-in, or he had to do it. No, I'm sorry. I
No.
digress.
This was okay. It was the 2000. I think
Same
we were
thing.
there. In fact, it was just a couple of days after our election down here, and it was so embarrassing to say I'm from Florida. But this fella had gotten up, and he was a keynote speaker at this National Civic League program. And what he had done when he became mayor was to ask the entire Washington, D.C. area if they'd like to come to a meeting and tell them what they wanted, what he wanted, you know, what they wanted, and he would then write his budget accordingly. And everybody made jokes about how silly this was, and something like a couple of thousand people showed up. And then he drafted what they said they wanted. And he put that in the newspaper, and he said, okay, we're having another meeting, and something like 10,000 people showed up. And what he eventually did is they made a plan that people would like. For example, he gave an example of people said they want X number of more of trees.
Right.
And do you know this whole thing? He did.
There's
She
more than
made
just, there's many places that are starting
This
to do it
was
that way.
fabulous. And then what he did is all the job descriptions were written in the city to match what the citizens wanted.
That's fantastic.
It was incredible. And then the citizens took responsibility for, let's say, 10% of the trees, so that trees that they wanted in. So their beautification program or so forth, the citizens said, well, we'll do 10%. Would you do, we want, 10,000 trees. We'll do 1,000. Would you do 9? And then they split that up among golf courses and this, and who was in charge of parks and recreation. Wouldn't it be nice to ask everybody what they think would make a diverse, tolerant, wonderful city?
Including children.
Including
You
the
have to
children.
ask children.
They're the best, aren't they? Because
Well,
they tell
one,
the
they're an
truth.
incredible indicator. One, they tell the truth. Two,
Yeah.
they know exactly what they want.
Yeah,
But three, they're tomorrow's leaders.
that's
And
true.
you want them to stay here. So,
What are the steps, and I'm going to ask all of you this, what do you think the steps are that we need to take to get ourselves in a position that we attract the creative class, the ones we can go, I mean, you mentioned go and get a house and fix it up and do that and, get an area together, and you've mentioned.
Well, I'll start by saying I'm not sure, because there's a, you want to do something that's very authentic to our community. So you build on the strengths that we've already got. You take the fact that we are a great climate with a lot of good outdoor recreation opportunities, and we need to build on that. Richard Florida is doing a big summit in May in Memphis, where he's inviting representatives from 100 different cities to come, and I'm going to go ahead and go. And at that summit, where you see all these different cities trying to figure out who's doing what right, how did you make that happen, you can do a lot of cross-pollinating. So I'm going to go to that, because I don't want this to be a one-day, 2-hour seminar, and then it's over and you sparked all this interest and people say, well, that was a nice idea, whatever happened to that? We want to create some sustainable, systemic changes. So I'm going to go ahead and see what these other community leaders are doing to make those changes.
That's a great.
I'm not sure yet.
How about advice for us as the viewership? The viewers, just people watching us today. Anything we could personally do to make all of this happen?
I actually think that the approach that Bill McBride was doing on Hillsborough Tomorrow, in terms of kind of getting a common vision
Bringing people
together. I
together.
mean, it's very similar to what you're talking about, what's going on in Washington, D.C., and I do think that, you know, the Hillsborough Tomorrow documents and all that stuff just really laid it out. I mean, it's not too far from all the ideas that Richard Florida's talking about. It's just,
That's
you know,
true.
sort of bringing things together. And I think that that you're right about the time that Tampa has now. I mean, this is Pam is, you know, an exciting mayor, exciting person. She's very, very bright. She's committed to these kind of things. I mean, you can see it from, you know, not only how she conducted herself as both a county commissioner as well as a in her last job as a supervisor of elections. But she's, you know, she's really open to it, and I think it's super critical for somebody in one of these major power centers. You know, if you know. The Tampa mayor is a great place to do it because, I mean, it has no regard, I mean, it has no authority over the county, but she can go over there and start rattling cages. She can rattle cages at USF and say, play ball, get involved, you know.
And she's been talking about that too.
And
She's
I just
already
think,
talked
you know, I
about
think
it.
that's a part of it. But you sit there and think about all the people on the sidelines. You have, you know, Alex Sink, Bill McBride. You know, you got Harry Teasley. You've got, you know, you've got all the Republicans, Sam Rashid, Dick Mant. You've got all this extraordinary talent that are all kind of coming together around these same ideas, you know. And you're going, it just takes somebody. Bring them in a room. You know, my hero is John Gardner. He says, just get them in a room and they'll figure it all out. But I think you get that crowd in a room with the citizens of the county, and I think you've got the start. But it takes somebody in elected leadership to do it, and that's why I think this is Pam's moment right now to call everybody
It's
together.
ours too. I want to tell you that I went to Atlanta to pick up 5, count them,
Did I cut you off?
5 creative people, 5 awards from our very talented outreach department, and I just wanted to show them to you. Got Kathy DeTola, one of the people in our outreach department, did a program on elder care using the Department of Aging was there, Aging Services. The Faces of Public Access, she also got one for, and she did for a Ponce de Leon project. She did a segment on Martin Luther King and so forth. And then Brian Lacey did one on Racing Roundup, which a lot of the race car drivers are on, Gene Adler's show, and he did one on the Halloween fun at Lowery Park. And they were so creative and so well done that we got these awards, and that's creativity down here at Public Access Channel. Just want you to
part
know
of the
that.
creative class.
We
Now,
have about 30 seconds to wrap up and tell everybody.
Tell them how to register for this event.
To register for this event, you have to go to www.tampabay.org.
Or
And
you
it's
can,
right there on the banner.
Okay.
And it's right there on or you can or call this phone number, and let's have that one again. I know it's going to be on.
878-2208.
813-878-2208. I really appreciate your tuning into our program, and I do hope you'll come back, and I do hope you will go on April 11th to see Richard Florida, The Rise of the Creative Class. And thank you for tuning in.